A lot of people need a good reason, or they need like you've got to have a compelling argument about why nature is good for you. And what I would rather do is spark a curiosity and an invitation for people to just come and try and experience it, right? Because when we start to experience in like very user-friendly, bite-sized ways, something starts to shift in us. And so you're so right. We don't always have to know why. We just have to know that it is.
Hi, I'm Christina Barcy. Welcome to the Boss Goddess podcast. This is your invitation to step out of the hustle and into your purpose and passion. What's my secret? Podcasting. This is how I've up-leveled my life on multiple occasions when I was ready to bring my dreams to life. And it's how I help my clients realize their big dreams. This is where you become the boss goddess in your niche and gently bring your dreams to life. Did you know podcasting is a clarity companion? By just going through the process of creating your podcast, you will become more clear on your path forward. And what follows clarity? Confidence. If you're ready to take a step forward that follows your authenticity, meets you exactly where you are now in this moment, and will guide you forward in a creative and organic way, then I encourage you to explore what a podcast created by you could look like. You can get started with my free Activate Your Goddess Era with Podcasting guidebook, where you'll receive 5 days of gentle guidance and a resource to your inbox that will get you started in exploring this option as your next step to clarity, confidence, and maybe even the very foundation that will become your next brand or business. Just go to boss-goddess.co/activate or click the link in the show notes. One of the things I love to do is gaze out of my home office window at the large oak trees that are across the street, the field behind that, and the birds that flutter and sit in the bushes and the tree in our front yard, to remind myself that I'm somewhere beautiful and I can connect with it anytime I'd like to by just looking away from my computer and watching long enough to notice the trees rustle or a bird land, to remember that I'm also a part of what is out there. If you've been listening to this podcast for some time, then you might be familiar with my concussion journey that is so intertwined with my entrepreneur journey, and how that all led me towards some burnout and a need to find ways to gently shift away from the heaviness and stuckness that that can bring. A big component was spending time connecting with nature. In fact, the home my husband and I found was out in the country, surrounded by many, many trees on the edge of a national forest just 25 minutes outside of LA, which totally speaks to my craving for nature, especially at the time we found this house, and incorporating it into my everyday life. And being here has been a big part of my own healing journey and my reconnection to purpose. My guest today actually has a similar story, but of course her details are different, which you'll hear about in just a moment. Her name is Penni Cox, and she is the founder and lead psychologist of Alive Eco Journeys and a TEDx speaker. She has worked all over the world as a mental health professional, working with both individuals and teams from Afghanistan to New York. And after her own burnout journey, she is proud to now be formally collaborating with nature, who she says is the better therapist, and is happily curating therapeutic adventures to foster a reconnection with our ecological self, the natural world, and those around us at her new venture, Alive Eco Journeys, where she says, keep your feet bare, your heart open, and your spirit wild. Here is my conversation with Penni Cox. Welcome, Penni.
Thank you. So nice to be here.
I'm
It's
so
really nice
happy to
to
have you.
see. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a really interesting journey that I think super resonates with what so many people are experiencing right now or have experienced, myself included. Our details are totally different, but I feel like so many of us are landing in this place. And we're going to get into what that is, but I'd love to learn about it through your journey. Can you share with us a little bit about what you were doing before Alive Eco Journeys and how that led you to what you're doing now?
Yeah, of course. And it's so lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much. I was working for an international humanitarian organization. So I've been in the world of humanitarian work for just short of 10 years now, but I've been a psychologist for just over 20 years. So that's, yeah, surprising. It's quite a long time now when I look back. But I was working as a counselor for staff and I was supporting them in their own mental health, in their psychosocial needs. And so running a lot of groups, supporting managers, doing individual counseling, doing kind of well-being projects for the organization. I worked in a team and it was really such a wonderful and beautiful job. I'm just so grateful. Honestly, I'm actually just grateful for my career because every nugget, which has been quite different from the one before, has really added to this beautiful picture and tapestry. Yeah, that's led to eco journeys, live eco journeys. But yeah, essentially, it wasn't always easy because we had a lot of challenges that the world went through, which was like COVID and all these things where we all had to try and survive very trying and pressing times. I had moved to New York, and this was just 5 years prior, or just 6 years now, I think.
I'm going to cut in
And
just for a second. You moved from where?
yeah,
Tell us where you're from and like where you moved from to New York.
I was living in Johannesburg working in a similar job, and then I got transferred to the headquarters in New York. And it was just short of 6 years ago that I moved there. And so I arrived, and I think about 3 months in, COVID hit. And so I landed in the city, in this country that I didn't know, at my dining room table with my laptop. And I was supporting a really large body of staff as a psychologist through a really trying time. And
Mm,
on top of that, because life doesn't stop, right? Like doesn't stop when work is going hectically. I had a really bad foot injury and I really struggled to even eventually walk down the streets 1 block. And
oh,
it was intense because, of course, New York is a walking city and it was COVID, so we couldn't catch public transport. And so, just very quickly, my life was sent just so many challenges from every angle. They couldn't find the problem with my foot. And eventually, a year later, I was in an operation. And then I was lying on my back in the bed, trying to recover from this foot injury. And so, just in a nutshell, I believe I was kind of taken to New York to really be challenged on every front. I believe in a purpose in my life journey. And yeah, it certainly was my start in that city was a tough one. And so it culminated through a whole lot of events into a real space of burnout.
mm,
And there was a lot of organizational change going on, which I was supporting staff navigating through, but I myself was going through that same change in the organization. And I always say with burnout, there's a lot of stigma around burnout and there's a lot of shame that a lot of people carry because I know because I'd worked with so many people going through burnout and telling them the story that it's okay. It's not a failure. It's not a weakness. And so, yeah, for myself to go through that, I was really challenged with those thoughts. And I realized that, the picture came to me of like an Olympic swimmer, not to say that I'm an Olympic swimmer, but a very resourced person. As a psychologist, I was and am very resourced with mental health skills. And so the feeling of going through burnout and not being able to kind of crawl my way out of it was a challenge. But I realized, just like in this image of this Olympic swimmer diving into water that sometimes is not conducive to their health, they're going to battle unless they get some help, right?
mm,
And so it really started me on this journey of really understanding burnout from a different angle, not just from a psychologist's desk. And what's more interesting is the journey of recovery that I went through. And that's really the nugget that brought me to Alive Eco Journeys, because I've always run to nature, just as
Mm.
nature has always soothed me so much. And I've been one of those weirdos that can sit for a day and stare into space in nature. And I'm not even like an introvert, and yet I can sit by myself in nature. I can do that. I find it so soothing. And when I was 18 years old as a psychology student, we were taken on wilderness therapy experiences. And so this little seed had been planted about
Ah.
the beauty of wilderness therapy. And when I left my master's year and we all went off to be psychologists, my fellow students wrote on the shirt, the farewell shirt, see you in the retreat center, you're going to start. And I was just so primed to do that. And my journey took me on a very different path. But in this moment of burnout, where one day I literally opened my computer, I was in Canada at the time working remotely, the internet didn't work. And it's just a normal problem. But suddenly that became a big problem for me. Suddenly I didn't quite know what to do. I got completely stuck on even how to properly send an email
Mm.
because my brain just went offline. It just
Mhm.
absolutely shut down. And I was like, I just can't think what the next step is here? And so I just reached this point where I was like, well, I'm just not okay. And I can't go online and hold a group and support a group when I'm feeling so poorly like this. And so I did what many of my colleagues did. They would reach out to me and say, what do I do? I reached out to one of my colleagues who was also a beautiful counselor for staff who supported me in that moment and said, you need to stop and you need to take a break. And so that's exactly what I did. And I took a whole month instantly off because I couldn't even send an email anymore. Burnout sometimes is thrown around, that label of burnout is thrown around where we're very tired, but sometimes we just need a holiday, right? It's not necessarily burnout, it's like I'm emotionally exhausted. But when
Mm.
we reach a point of burnout, we are in a space of not only emotional exhaustion, but we also are feeling a kind of sense of negative thinking and the sense of kind of I'm not feeling aligned to where my path is going. And there's just all this additional layers that build onto this emotional exhaustion. And so, yeah, I needed not just a holiday, but I needed a kind of coming home to self and
Mm.
to kind of check in with myself. And so what I did was what I naturally do, which is run to nature. And so that's where I went. I was fortunate to be, as I say, in Canada. And so I went to Montreal to the beautiful forest there. And I spent a week in that forest. And I did just sit really with the trees. And I just started to watch the sun through the leaves and just get back into the rhythm of the trees and the wind and the sun on my face. And I thought that I would be journaling and I'd be doing all this kind of very good self-growth stuff. But actually, I just found myself becoming more and more slow and leaning into just the rhythms that were starting to become louder and louder and more soothing to me in that week. After spending time in the forest, I was like, I'm not done. I want to go to the beach. So lucky me, I went to Miami and I went and lay on that beach for a week. And I lay on the beach and I floated. It's my favorite thing to do, floated on my back in the water and then lay on the beach and then floated on my back in the water and just like the sounds of the sea, the mood of the waves and the salt, like the good ions that were entering my body. I really started to feel this recovery start to arrive. And I still wasn't quite done, but I had to go back to New York. And so I did. And then I spontaneously, with the help of a dear neighbor, adopted two little fluff ball rabbits.
Oh.
And they were very New York rabbits. They were very spoilt apartment, apartments, living rabbits. But anyone that's adopted rabbits, and it's really, you have to have adopted rabbits or owned rabbits to understand this kind of relationship that you forge with these crazy little animals. But to bond with rabbits, you have to lie on the ground and you've got to let them hop around you for a few days. And so
Mm.
I was forced into this very mindful space because in order for these little sweet bunnies, they're little babies, in order for them to really bond with me and to forge a good start to our relationship in this apartment, I had to lie on the carpet and just be with these sweet little animals. And, none of those weeks that I went and immersed myself in nature were cognitive or intentional. I couldn't even send an email. I just followed my impulse of where I needed to go to be okay. And, quite shortly after that, I returned to work. And it was a bit of a slow process, kind of coming back into the rhythm of work. But what struck me, having worked with people going through burnout a lot, my recovery struck me as a bit different in that I noticed how I had bounced forward quite a lot quicker than most. That I'd been able to go from such a difficult space of really feeling quite broken to being able to re-enter and reintegrate and kind of take on the work again. And I was very curious about that. On reflecting, I realized that there were two things that I drew so strongly from in that month. The one was the mental health skills that I was really blessed to have because it's my job teaching people skills. I'm so fortunate that my backpack has got a lot that I can pull from. Okay, I can meditate, I can use the worry window, I can use this breath work technique. So I had so many mental health skills available to me. But in addition to that, I had really sought nature out and allowed nature to kind of bring me back to a place of regulation and grounding. And as I returned into work and I started seeing how we operate in most workspaces, we're in boardrooms with PowerPoints talking about well-being. I just started to think to myself, but there's more to well-being than just talking about it with a PowerPoint. And I'm not saying that that's bad. It's a good approach to educate people, and we should be doing that in boardrooms. But I had been doing that for years, and I just discovered that if I go into nature, there's something really beautiful that shifts much more quickly than just talking about mental health. And so I started to become really curious about how can I work with people in nature in the same way to get the same outcomes, to get the same skills imparted to them that we want to with teams in rooms. But how can we do that in natural spaces? It really struck me that very often, I think it happens in America. I know it definitely happens here in South Africa. For us as teams, we go to very beautiful places for our conferences and meetings. We go to game reserves and beautiful mountain areas, and we always go to really amazing spaces. And then we spend 5 days in the conference room with all this beautiful nature that we've traveled to around us, right? Because we're having so many meetings. And so it just struck me that could we take a little portion of that time and take teams into nature to achieve the same mental health and well-being outcomes for those sections of their conferences? And I started to play with this in my mind and was fortunate to then start taking teams out into nature. So I'm so pleased that the first Alive Eco Journey was in Central Park in the middle of New York. So in the middle of the city that I really had to kind of wrestle with, and that actually gave me the gift of a vision of this business. I wanted to pay tribute to it and just give it a little nod and say, okay, we had it out, but you actually became a real gem to me in the end. And so the first eco journey we ran in Central Park, and it was so beautiful because it planted the seed as well, and this real curiosity for me about bringing people into nature that's close to them versus having to travel miles away. And so long story, but that's the story that's brought me here to today, to Alive Eco Journeys, because something was growing in me and I realized it's time to come back to Africa. It's time to plant this beautiful business in like very fertile, rich African soil and to kind of sprout this company, this business that is busy with the space where nature and mental health play. So how can we work with individuals? How can we work with teams? How can we work with entrepreneurs to help them to kind of re-engage with their real, just that internal compass, with their visionary part of themselves, with the part of us that really is kind of quite wild and free. And how can we use that to help them achieve their mental health and well-being outcomes? And so that's what I'm curious about, and that's what we do at Alive Eco Journeys. And so we've just started the road in Africa at the beginning of the year. And yeah, I'm loving the adventure. We're learning a lot, and there's a lot of people that are drawing close and coming with curiosity and openness, and so that's what we're up to.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Wow. Okay. There's so much to unpack. And thank you for sharing all the turns that you took along the way because, one, I relate so much in my own journey in the way that you described it. And going back to like the early part of your story about like the guilt and the shame and the way that we feel sort of defeated by what we're experiencing because it's usually happening to people that are very high performing. I mean, it can happen to anyone, but a lot of spaces that are have a high demand and high performance as part of that will end up in this place that we both ended up in. I'm an entrepreneur, so for me, it landed or sort of unfolded in a slightly different way. But you shared about your injury and just sort of a few circumstances that built towards this experience. I had a lot of that same situation in my own story where I had two concussions. I was working through a brain injury the whole time that kind of like really positioned me to be on track for burnout.
Yeah.
And I'm also a coach and I'm holding space for others very often and leveraging that in the production work I was doing as well. So I felt very confused over how I could have this, like you say, backpack of tools and be unable to pull them out and use them in the same way that I have done for myself in the past and then also for others. And it just felt very lonely and I felt confused and a lot of shame and guilt around
Yeah.
all of it. I'm so glad you had community and someone that you could turn to help you along the way. I didn't quite find that in my journey, but what I did find as well was nature. And so that is, you're right, it's such a simple return that is healing with no effort. And I think that's the beauty of so many of the tools I discovered for myself. They were just really, really low effort.
Mm.
The other one for me was like simple, simple, simple creativity, like coloring, like
Yeah.
just an act of something that felt joyful without needing it to become something. I work in creativity, so this idea of outcome has now been very attached to creativity and sort of letting
Yeah.
those things go. So I love that you were able to just sit in nature rather than needing something to happen there. Like you allowed yourself space to bask and connect with that rhythm, which
Yeah.
is really key. I want to talk about that a little bit because this idea of returning to a natural rhythm that we're easily connect with by simply being in nature. There's science to it, and I wish I knew more about that. But I'm wondering, do you know the science behind how our cells sort of regenerate when we're sitting in nature?
I can't speak directly to how our cells regenerate. What I can tell you is about the beautiful trees and
Mm.
the phytoncides that they emit, which is, and I hope I've got that right, because as much of as I've told groups about them, I often pronounce the word incorrectly. But they're the chemicals that the trees release. I'm sure you know of this, that they release these chemicals that keep the bugs at bay.
Mm.
And this is a source of forest bathing. So I've recently done a forest bathing certification, and it was just divine. How divine. My training was to go and learn these beautiful skills for 5 days immersed in a forest, right? What a great way to learn. But
Yeah.
it's a start of the forest bathing that we're hearing more and more of coming out of Japan, where they discovered that communities that were closer to the forests were healthier, and they had these what's called killer cells, a higher rate of killer cells, which is actually a good thing. It's what we want in our bodies to fight kind of toxins and all the tumors
Ah.
and all these things. And they saw a direct relationship between the more that people are inhaling these chemicals from the trees that they're emitting, the higher their killer cell level in their bodies are. And that's what started this whole movement of we need to be bathing in forests, which isn't actual water bathing, right? It's bathing in the atmosphere because the atmosphere is so healthy. And so that's one example of how there's a direct impact on our physiology just
Mm.
by the chemicals, the good chemicals that we're breathing in from the trees. And then, of course, many know about the grounding traditions, and it's becoming so much more proven,
Earthing.
which is
Yeah.
wonderful. The earthing, yeah, around the ions, that free radicals in our body, they're linked to extra positive charges. And so we've kind of got these free radicals in us, and the different ways that we can actually detox our systems, which has again an impact on our healthy cells growth. And so, by being barefoot on the ground, we're earthing ourselves, we're grounding ourselves, and we're actually neutralizing these positive ions that are kind of going around in us, these positive charges. And
Mm.
what I find really interesting as well is the breaking water. So waterfalls, the sea crashing
Yeah.
of the waves, or even a shower, which explains why. I mean, I love a good bath, but we got to admit that you feel refreshed after a shower, right? You feel relaxed after a bath, you feel
Right.
refreshed after a shower. And so the crashing water, anywhere where water's breaking, so to speak, it's releasing more negative ions into the atmosphere, which are going to neutralize these positive charges that are harming our bodies. And so, those are just three examples of, was it three or two examples of
Right.
how nature is just being set up. It's set up to keep us healthy. And what I ask people often is, when last has your bare foot touched this earth, or your skin, in fact? When last has your skin actually touched this earth? Because we get out of bed, we put on slippers, maybe, we go and we shower, and then we get dressed and we leave our house, and we haven't even touched the earth yet. We get into the car, we drive on tar, we go into our offices, we come home. And when I ask this question, it can be quite challenging, because some people will go, well, it's been days. And so
Mm.
just see how this beautiful resource, it's an absolute free resource. We haven't even spoken about mental health yet, but physical and mental is so connected. I don't even know why we separate the two, right? But with this beautiful resource that's going to keep us healthy, and it's right here, it's just
Yeah.
there, and we miss it with our shoes.
Yeah. Thank you for
Yeah,
those are the exact examples I was hoping to hear. I just couldn't remember all the science behind them. So thank
yeah.
you for sharing that
I'm
because
surprised that it all came out. There you go.
yeah, well done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the water. I forgot about that too, the like waterfalls and the negative ions being compatible with our positive ions as human beings. We need the opposite, and electronics give off negative. So then I feel it draining my energy throughout the day. So going outside is usually how I can rebalance if I need to go back in and do more computering. And these are just things that I personally observed as well. And then haven't like fully studied. And the ways that I've heard about them more often is the mental health side. So it's actually nice to remember or learn that it's affecting us on a cellular somatic level as well. And I think this idea of somatics is becoming very popular, and we talk a lot about the nervous system and calming that. And I feel like it's often connected to this idea of mental health, but it's actually physically healing our bodies and making us stronger against pathogens or whatnot as well. So I think it's important to just point that out if someone wants to go down a rabbit hole with it further. But it's
Exactly.
good to know that it's not just, okay, like I feel better now. It's like you're actually breathing in things that
Right.
are going to make you a healthier human and more resilient in the world
Yeah,
too.
exactly. And something that I always invite people to reflect on is, why do I feel better? Because we don't ask that question. We just know we do. But there's some
Mm.
kind of shift that's happened, right? So
Hmm.
there's a shift that's happened. What is that? Something has happened. I've been in nature and I feel better, but why? And so this is where it's a really exciting time, I think, around the world of nature connection and nature, just learning about the supportive and healing benefits of nature, because science is catching up. We're saying science is catching up with the woo, because suddenly
Yep.
there's research that is actually saying, but what we're feeling and what theories have kind of developed around all of this, because we're feeling it, is starting to be backed up by science, and that's really exciting.
It is. And I can't help but talk about that intuitive connection that we have with all of this stuff as well. It's like we're so quick to discount our experience if it's not
Mhm.
backed by science immediately. I mean, if you feel better, then
Do
you feel better.
it.
Like,
Exactly.
why are we going to
Yeah.
throw that away because we
Yeah.
can't point to a book or an internet article or an internet
Yeah.
article, a web article
Yeah.
or blog or some study immediately because those things take time to develop as well. And a lot of them are maybe already available, but they're not on the internet, right? Or it's just coming back to this idea of trusting the flow. I heard that so much in your story as well.
Yeah.
Like you already knew you had a strong connection with nature. Not only that, but you went through this early experience in your education when you were studying to become a psychologist. Is that the correct?
Yes.
They were like, great, you're going to open a retreat. And you're like,
Yeah.
everyone knows you as that's your sweet spot. And I know the world takes us in all these different directions sometimes, but I love that you came back to this place that feels so connected to who you are naturally. And it makes sense.
If I may kind of add to what you're saying, just around, because it's just a thought that came to me, is that, and I think that's what I've become so passionate about, is reminding people of this aliveness that is available to them. Because, it's so true. A lot of people need a good reason, or they need like you've got to have a compelling argument about why nature is good for you. And what I would rather do is spark a curiosity and an invitation for people to just come and try and experience it, right? Because when we start to experience in like very user-friendly, bite-sized ways, something starts to shift in us. And so you're so right. We don't always have to know why. We just have to know that it is. And so let's
Hmm.
do more of that. And that's why I called my company Alive Eco Journeys, because it's coming alive again, like finding that reconnection, that spark, which just naturally happens in nature, which is why, to your point, coming back to this space for me is just such a joy. Because the minute I can just get people to agree to come with into nature, then nature just shines. It's like the best co-therapist ever, just shines and does her beautiful thing. And yeah,
Yeah.
so I invite listeners as well that are listening to us chat to stoke that curiosity about any nature that's around. Go put a toe in it.
Yeah. Yes, and you took I was totally going to say this too, like what a great like co-founder or
Right?
great companion
Yeah.
to help do the work that you want to do. It's just
Yeah.
there for you. It's not that it's easy, but it allows it to bolster like everything you're putting together as a program. Like it feels so available, like you said, and so part of our connection if we remember that it is easily available if we allow it to be. And the curiosity is such a great way to encourage someone to
Yeah.
kind of wonder what might that look like for me. And
Yeah.
yeah, I was living in a very tough landscape before I moved here, and I moved to the country as a result of like desperately desiring this fresh
Agree.
air and trees. And now we're like, I can't get enough of the air here because there's so many trees. And you're helping me understand even more on a deeper level why I'm so obsessed with it because it
Yeah,
feels and
it's
smells so good. I just
body.
stand by the screen. I'm like, ah, it's so good.
I believe
But
you.
we're living by the 5 freeway. Like our house was like the yard and then the 5 freeway shared like the yard basically. It was we were
Wow.
inside of the highway essentially is the proximity was so close and the air was so bad and it was also so loud. So on every sensory level, and I'm very smell oriented. I joke about with my husband
Okay.
about it because he's always stuffy and I'm always assaulted by all the smells. And that was just such a hard environment. It was hard to go outside when I felt the urge to, because when I got out there, the air was terrible. The loud noise of the freeway was assaulting, and everything about it was a task to go beyond what was accessible right in front of the house or behind the house or whatnot. So, all that to say, like you were in New York, which they do a good job of like creating parks and things like that. But what would you say to someone who was like me that just couldn't go outside and feel good in nature right away? We had planned in the house too, but I needed more than that. What would you share as a small first step for someone who's kind of feeling
Yeah,
stuck?
I love that question. Thank you. Because, yeah, I'm just super curious about the first step. Like, the first step for me is the most interesting step. There's a poem by David White, who's just one of my absolute, I just adore him. He's a poet and a philosopher. And he talks about just like, what's just the next step, not the second, not the third, not the fourth? What's just the next steps? That's a good question. Thank you. You know, you say that you have plants. I certainly, what I omitted to tell you about on my journey of recovery and burnout, I came back to New York, and what was so amazing as I returned, my neighbor was moving.
Mm.
And she opened the door, and I just thought that day, I really need to get some plants in this house, you know? Like I didn't have plants. I was living in the middle of Manhattan. I was by the freeway as well. I mean, and I'm a nature girl. So it was that word assault, I think is such a good word, an assault to senses. And for you, smell is your primary kind of sense. For me, it's sound. So it really it was a battle. And so anyway, so I came back and I thought, you know, I need to get some plants. And my neighbor opened a door and she was moving that day. And you know, when you're kind of in that desperate moment and you just like want to
Hmm.
get rid of, she's like, please, she came to me, she's like, please take my plants. I was like, sure, isn't that amazing how plants just arrived? She
Yeah.
had about, honestly, about 12 beautiful, beautifully developed pot plants. I mean, they were her babies. They were so well cared for. And they just moved into my home. So within a day, I was surrounded by, I mean, not in a, you know, you can just have one too many pot plants in apartments as well. So it wasn't, don't get that picture. But they were like really just these really beautiful kind of, and I felt like beings that
Mm.
came into my space. And one of them was, is it a fiddle leaf fig tree? I think that's it. Fiddle
Like a
leaf. Yeah.
finicky fig.
But yeah, those big with the big leaves and like
Yeah.
they tall and this beauty moved into my room. And I can't tell you the difference that that made to the environment for me to suddenly have,
Mm.
and I could actually feel the change in the atmosphere. Now I understand why. I didn't know why then. But just because now I'm starting to understand just what we were talking about, the physical interactions that go on between us and plants, you know. So
Mm.
already it was just making my environment healthier. But every morning I'd wake up, whereas usually I'd wake up and it was a beautiful place that I lived in. And I've come to love New York, so I don't want to put a bad picture on it. But it was very different to my usual nature sites in South Africa. And so
Mm.
I woke up every morning looking at this beautiful tree. It was the first thing that I woke up to. And the difference in waking up was in South Africa, we say chalk and cheese. Americans don't understand
Yeah,
that.
what tell us what that
Like
means.
it's such a weird saying. We'd always joke about it when I was there. Chalk and cheese, it just means the opposites, you know? It was like, that's a weird saying. I don't know.
I
But,
love it.
but yeah, just waking up to this beautiful tree really made a difference. And what I started to understand, I had these rabbits in my home, I had plants in my home. And when I started to understand the principle of reciprocity, it's a very powerful principle, and it's one that we really kind of stand on in Alive Eco Journeys, this understanding of our absolute interconnectivity with nature. And like a pot plant is also nature, right? We're nature, pot plant's nature. And like when you actually start to inquire after nature, then you start to forge a relationship with it. And many people don't realize that they can very often go into nature or even walk past their pot plants, and it's a backdrop. We use nature, and I get quite sad about this actually, because many of us use nature as a backdrop for
Uh,
our internal process, right? We go on retreats, we go to these experiences, but nature isn't the co-therapist, it's not the partner, it's not the kind of very living being around us. It's a backdrop to our internal angst or process.
mm,
It's for me, it's a very disconnected kind of space. And so it's not we don't necessarily feel as connected as we could returning back into our everyday. And so what I'd say to that person, and sorry, it's taken a long road to get there, but what I'd say is even if it is the pot plants in your home, or even if it is the animal that you're caring for, or it is the sweet little bird that comes and knocks on your window every now and again, inquire after it, inquire after
mm,
them. Ask nature, how are you today? Ask your pot plants, how are you doing today? Pay attention to how your plant is. Start to forge a bit of a friendship and a relationship with this living being. Because when you
mm.
start to forge a relationship, then you start to activate the principle of reciprocity. So that's what I'd say. Start to form a curiosity, even with the pot plant, like just paying attention to it, And that can be very soothing, surprisingly, as you start to understand that as I forge a relationship with you, so you're dependent on me. And so there's a sense of belonging that starts to come in there. Like I belong to this world just as this pot plant belongs to me.
That's such a beautiful answer. And you're reminding me of the moments that helped me further connect with my presence, just being more present. I get stuck in the future a lot. Everyone's a little different how they work. Some are more focused on the past. It's a little bit of both. Mine's really futurist. I'm always in the future somewhere. And I've always been a little bit like that. So for me, it's reminding myself of being here. Nature's a great way to help with that too. And my husband got me I think it's like called a praying plant. So it moves, like the leaves go up and down if you notice it. And sometimes I'll hear it moving. I'm like,
That's
my plant.
amazing.
Or I'll hear it drinking. I have
Oh,
this bulb that goes in and I'll hear it slurping, which I
oh,
didn't know it could do.
amazing.
Yeah, so I'm sharing that because I would have never known about this if it wasn't for my very green-thumbed husband who bought me this plant just for me for my office because he has a whole bunch and this one's mine.
Yeah,
And I am not good at keeping things alive because I get so distracted from my present moment. So it's like a good reminder to this plant actually talks and does things. So it forces me, or, it encourages me to pay more attention to how it's doing and create more of a relationship with it. It's right over there in the corner behind me. If you are watching a clip, you might see it. And the other thing I would suggest for someone, just to add and build off of what you just shared with this reciprocity concept, is to create a small garden.
mm,
And we did a garden this year and it was amazing. It feels like magic, especially if you plant them from seeds. You're like, there's no way this is
amazing.
going to work. This isn't going to turn into
And
anything.
then
It's
it
just
does.
dirt and seeds. Like there's no way. It's so silly, but it really does feel like, okay, good luck. This is not going to work.
Yeah,
And we had this huge garden that we got to eat from and harvest. And, it doesn't have to be a big garden, but I love the idea of planting something you can eat, like in the home, just a small planter, whether it's herbs is probably the easiest, or like one vegetable that does well
yeah,
indoors. And then you can go spend time picking those herbs or vegetables, preparing them in some way. And it really sort of creates this connection. It did for me in the magic that nature has to offer and that it kind of does its thing. Things
yeah.
grew that we didn't plant too, which was kind of cool because we had compost. So there was like this mystery squash that was growing. We're like, what is this going to be? We did not plant this. And got this big, beautiful spaghetti squash that we got to eat for
Oh,
dinner one day. And it was just truly wild in the best way. And
yeah.
it really did help me feel connected. And it created a ritual in my day as well, which I think is a big part for me when I was healing burnout. We're creating these new, simple, very accessible rituals
Yeah,
that were so low barrier, they sound ridiculous to even consider as a tool, but they were. And then you can build on them from there. But
yeah.
that's what I would add to that, just kind of gentle, and nature's a beautiful way to incorporate that.
Yeah, and like I mean, soil is so filled with such good things as well. There's so many like just smelling soil. They're starting to talk about how gardeners they just generally have happier dispositions, and there's reasons for that because there's like good hormones going through their
Mm.
systems, endorphins, and so beautiful. If you can get your hands in soil and you can start to plant things and grow things, yeah, that's good for body, mind, and spirit for sure.
I love the way that you're building this to be. You really made sure you emphasized for us to understand that it's not a retreat where the common idea, like you said, where it's this backdrop to the mental health program, let's say, or the wellness program or the activities. It's really about integrating that into the program itself. And I'd love to hear more about if you can just share maybe like what your favorite sort of process is right now, or one of the offerings you have and how you kind of approach that.
Absolutely. So one of our catchphrases is we don't retreat, we come alive. So
Mm,
not to at all put a negative spin on retreats because I love them.
for sure.
Alive
Yeah.
Eco Journeys is busy with something else though. We believe that we go into nature to spark our ecological self and our aliveness so that we can really shift and move from that energy back into our everyday. We want to see transformation happening, right? And so we see ourselves stepping forward versus escaping something. Because I think to your point around nature being the backdrop, what we can often do is we're like, oh, I need a break. I need to get into nature. We go into nature, we kind of have this mentality of escaping. And so that when we go back into every day, it feels even harder to return there. And so for me, that's a clear evidence of the disconnect we actually unintentionally are perpetuating, where I'm very busy
Mm.
with how do we nurture reconnection with ourself, with nature, and with kind communities. So that's why on our offerings, there are always these three aspects. So there's always a kind of mental health skill aspect. So learning some one or two practical skills that can translate our nature experience into our everyday so we don't leave it there. There's this kind of reconnection with self. There's the nature connection element so that we can really forge this reciprocity with nature, that it becomes our partner in our journey. And then the third element of a kind community. So people around being present with us. I love it. It's so cool because it nurtures me. As a
Mm.
therapist, it's just so fun when you find an experience working with people where you feel good and nurtured in the process too, especially coming from a burnt out space.
You mentioned something that I love to just get your take on the definition of, which is our ecological selves.
Mm.
Can you tell me more about like what exactly that means?
Yes, I love the ecological self. Some call it the wild self.
Ah.
So the ecological self is the best way to describe it is, you know, that feeling when you're looking at a beautiful, tall, majestic waterfall or a gorgeous mountain, or you're looking from a view over just over the distance into this beautiful landscape, that feeling of expansiveness, and yet you feel small and expanded at the same time. Do you know that feeling? That feeling of kind of awe
Yeah.
and connectedness. So there you're starting to tap into the ecological self, this part that actually operates according to all these kind of principles we've been talking about, that part that feels so connected to the environment, that feels in rhythm and in sync with the reciprocity, with the immense belonging to the space. And it's our most kind of natural part. It's our wild part. It's a part of us that is before we learn about all the shoulds and we get all those messages, right? So that's what we mean by the ecological self. And that's one of the core parts that we work on with the Live Eco Journeys is to rediscover this ecological self. And the more we grow it, expand it, become to know it again, the more we feel like we're coming home, that we're just becoming more and more who we are. And when we can hold on to that space, when we start to embody it, because what I believe is that when I get the feeling of something, then I know it, right? When I start to feel it physically in my body, a kind of sensation, a way of being, then when I'm sitting in a boardroom or when I'm sitting in my car, I can start to feel, am I coming from that space or am I coming from another space? And so the more we grow a part of ourselves, the more it can start to translate into other places. And for me, I want to be my most authentic, real, wild, radical, awesome self in this world. And for me, at least, the route is to be diving into nature, to have these feelings of expansiveness and awe and permission to be everything that I am. And that's at least my take on the ecological self.
I love that so much. And it's such a beautiful way to tap into the things that can become very cerebral in the conversations that a lot of us have around wellness, or it's almost spiritual in some ways. It's up for the interpreter, but I could see that connection too. And being of this oneness is sort of this oneness and also individuality kind of simultaneously occurring and tapping into both. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm
Yeah, I
hearing.
love it.
Would you say that
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
That's a good way of putting
It's
it, you
really
know. It's so nice to kind of unpack concepts because you're always building on it and there's definitely a spiritual aspect, you know. I do believe that we've got this kind of spirit, we're spiritual beings, right? And so however you interpret that and whatever way you express that is just beautifully unique and personal, I think, but one can't be in nature and not experience something bigger because we're just
Right.
wired to feel awe. And the minute I'm feeling awe, it's because I'm connecting with something bigger than myself. Well, that's what I believe. We're definitely not saying go out for hours or days, although how beautiful. Just in one's everyday life, how can you start to engage with your natural environment? And it could be as something as simple as us sitting right here, right now, taking a beautiful breath in and out, get engaged with nature because oxygen is nature, you know? It's not outside, it's right here. I'm nature. Engaging with you is
Right.
nature.
Oh, I love that. That's so beautiful to sort of close the conversation on. But before we do, I'd love to know if there is just one thing that you hope someone walks away with from the conversation that we had today. What would you like that to be?
I think I would love them to have the curiosity that we spoke about, a gentle curiosity about how can I discover one more thing in nature in a that's going to kind of bring a little bit more of life and spark into my day. So I'll leave listeners with that, like a challenge to look over the next days about what's one curiosity that I can have and how does it feel when I actually follow that quiet voice that's leading me there.
I love that. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Now, how can we connect with you?
Yeah, you can check out our website, liveecojourneys.com. You can check me out on Instagram. So I'm always posting different little things that we're up to. You know, my hope is that we can really continue to build a beautiful, alive Eco Journeys community of people that are just playing in nature, being curious in nature, and growing together. So yeah, check us out on social media. LinkedIn, you can check me out there as well. So yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for such a beautiful, connected, and I felt a lot of awe during our talk.
yeah,
Yeah, just thank you so much for sharing what you're creating.
pleasure. It was so lovely talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Boss Goddess podcast. And if you're ready to get started in exploring podcasting as an option for your next step to clarity, confidence, and maybe even the very foundation that will become your next brand or business, then go to boss-goddess.co/activate to get 5 days of gentle guidance and resources from me that will tap into your magic and your wisdom with my free Activate Your Goddess Era with Podcasting guidebook. Just go to boss-goddess.co/activate or click the link in the show notes.